Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. And today we're going to kick off the first part of a longer series covering the undisputed king of all dungeon crawls and dungeon dives. And that's right, it is Warhammer Quest. When I first started the dungeon dive, I wanted to do a blog and create videos for the kinds of games that I like. For archival reasons, I guess you could say. Even though I want to do some Let's Plays and some reviews, what I really want to focus on is just articles and vlogs and putting out information about the games that I like, looking at the components, looking at them kind of in a historical context, in the kind of maybe the industry, and in my own life. Now, I am not a board game historian, and so I don't want to try to come across as some kind of expert on the factual information. But I am doing a little bit of research, and I think it would be neat to have kind of a collective place where people can go to find out this kind of information. Kind of like, I guess, the Board Game Geek is like that, but add a little bit more of a personal touch to it. So I hope you guys find this interesting. I know people do this with like retro video games. There are quite a few of those channels on YouTube, but I don't see a lot of things like this with board games. Marco Wargamer does some of this. Geek Gamer, I think her name is, her channel, she focuses on a lot of like retro games and stuff, and she kind of does some of this. And just I think today Tom Vassell on the Board Game Geek started his history of the Dice Tower, which I found really fascinating. So I find that kind of like personal relationship with the hobby, that side of things, fascinating. So anyways, before we get to the table and we start taking a look at Warhammer Quest, I just wanted to give a little bit of a background on how I came to Games Workshop. Now, Games Workshop is my favorite game company. I don't think there is another game company out there that does theme and story integration with the game better than Games Workshop. Their writing up to a point was fantastic. Some of their flavor text and their stories. They have the entire the Black Library, their entire library of novels and short stories and novellas. Some of those are really, really well written. Some of the fantasy stuff is just excellent. And all the little stories and the snippets and the lore and all of their books and supplemental materials it's always really evocative, and they're really good at setting the stage. And so that's kind of what drew me in to their worlds. Excuse me. And the first game that I got into when I was in high school, the first Games Workshop game, I think it was around 1989. I was a freshman in high school, and that was Space Hulk. Alien and Aliens were a big, important part of my childhood and people my age. We loved Alien, we loved Aliens, and here was this game, Space Hulk, that was basically just an incredible board game version of Aliens. And I'm pretty sure I got that for my birthday. I think I remember my grandma taking me to a little game store in Fresno, California, where I grew up, called the Game Preserve. And that's where I bought most of my games growing up. And that game just completely opened my mind to the possibilities of hobby gaming. Even though I'd already played some Dungeons and Dragons and stuff before that, something about Games Workshop, their production and the art and the models and just everything about it, I was hooked. And then I think about a year after that, at that same high school, I joined this thing that was called Odyssey of the Mind. It was kind of like an academic decathlon for artists. And the leader of our group, he had Talisman. And so we played Talisman all the time. And I absolutely fell in love with that game as well. And then later I would play 40K. I was trying to remember recently the version of 40K. It must have been the first edition, because the first edition came out like I think in 1987, and then the second didn't come out until 93. So I was already out of high school then. I definitely wasn't playing 40K then. But I was looking at the covers for the first edition books, and none of them looked familiar. So I don't know. I'm having a hard time remembering the 40K stuff that I played. I know I had like an Eldar army, and then I also used, of course, all my models from Space Hulk and Advanced Space Crusade. And then also at the time, KB Toys, an old toy shop in the mall, they were closing out a whole bunch of copies of regular Space Crusade. And I think they were like $5 or something. So I picked up like 5 sets and had all the Space Marines from that. So anyways, that's a long way to say that I actually never played Warhammer Quest when it was out. And for some reason, when I was into Games Workshop back then, I was into their science fiction stuff and not so much their fantasy stuff. And now it's kind of the opposite. So I never played Warhammer Quest. Now, Warhammer Quest came out in 1993, and it was active until I think like 98 or so. It was commercially active, supported by Games Workshop. And so in 93, I was either out of high school or just started college. And then I kind of wasn't so much into board games at that time. I was playing Magic the Gathering, eventually other CCGs like Shadow Fist, and lots of RPGs. Champions and GURPS were kind of like the main games that we played. And Palladium stuff. We really liked the Palladium games, Robotech and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So in 93, when Warhammer Quest came out, I didn't even know, I had no idea. I was oblivious to this game. And I don't even know if I really would have liked it when it came out. I'm not sure. I'm sure if I saw that back of the box, it would have been pretty amazing. It also was very expensive. It was 40 pounds, according to a recent old catalog I looked through. So 40 British pounds at the time, I think, was like $3 a pound or something. So I want to say it must have been about $120, maybe $100 in the United States in 1993. That was a lot of money. I don't remember how much Space Hulk was, but I remember it being pretty special that I got it. So it wasn't until years later that I even became aware of Warhammer Quest, and as I started developing my taste for dungeon crawl, dungeon dive, fantasy adventure board games, that's when that game came on my radar. And ever since I first heard of it, I wanted it. You know, it was always kind of expensive, and I never really seemed to get the money together at the right time to find a copy. And then just last year, I actually found an incredible copy for a decent, I mean, it was an expensive purchase for sure, but it was unpunched. All the minis were in SKUs. The cards were still in shrink wrapped. It was pretty much a brand new copy. It was opened, but nothing in it had been touched. And it came with some expansions and all kinds of stuff. And so what we're going to do is, in this video series, is we're going to, in this first part, we're just going to take a look at the base game. And then in the additional or subsequent parts, we'll take a look at the expansions. We'll take a look at the, so I've got most of, and I got other ones coming, of the White Dwarfs that had articles about Warhammer Quest in there. And yeah, we'll just kind of take a look at all the things, and I'll talk about them and take a look at some of the miniatures. Oh, and I also have our first contest. I don't know how many contests we're going to have, but I thought this one might be cool. So this contest will run until let's say it's like till the end of March. So all you have to do is subscribe, like this video, and then comment about something easy. What's your favorite dungeon dive board game? What do you like? And the prize will be, now this isn't like super great, but I thought it was kind of cool, will be these original pages from White Dwarf. I think it's 186. So this is the expansion, The Flames of Khazla. Sorry, I'm getting some bad reflection there. There we go. So this has, I think it's about 6 pages of text with a page with some extra cards and a map tile that you can cut out and glue, and 6 little side quests that you can go on. So if somebody doesn't have this and you want it, I'll mail it to you. I'll make sure it mails flat, and I'll mail it at my cost if it's in the continental United States. If it's not, then somebody can pay me, PayPal me. So anyways, yeah, so like, subscribe, comment your favorite dungeon crawl, and I will pick one of the names randomly and send that out to you. So all right, we're gonna jump down to the table and take a look at the base game of Warhammer Quest. Okay, so the best place to start is definitely with the box at this cover. As you can clearly tell, this was definitely in the 90s era of Games Workshop with their very extreme art. Post Gary Chalk, I think there's more of an elegance in the Gary Chalk era. Not to say that it wasn't also very genre ghetto-ish during his days there, but after he left and into the 90s, things got a lot more wild, a lot more garish, I guess you could say. Maybe more looking like the side of a stoner's van in the 70s or something. Lots of airbrush and skulls and lens flares and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so this cover, I mean, yeah, it's a little tacky, but you know what? It's also freaking awesome. You've got your elf. You've got your barbarian and your wizard. No dwarf. I don't know where the dwarf is. People have asked that before. Like, what happened to the dwarf? So that kind of sucks. But anyways, there's the front cover. And the back cover. Now, this is how you do a back cover of a board game right here. Let me tell you. All of the components laid out so you can see everything that you get in the game. The character cards, the small dice to keep track of hit points, the event cards, the dungeon cards, treasure, minis, map tiles, 3 books, the character sheets. Yeah, just what a display that is. Every time I see that, I just get happy. It's just like, yes, this is a box full of adventure. And then you just have a nice little piece of flavor text here. Warhammer Quest is the game of battle, magic, and adventure in the danger-ridden caverns of the Warhammer world. You take the part of heroic warriors as they explore the caves and tunnels, vanquishing terrifying monsters and avoiding deadly traps in their quest for treasure and glory. And then a really huge sidebar here of all the content you get. You could really tell, I think, with this game that Games Workshop was really proud of how much they were putting into this box and how much they were giving their players, because it's all listed, it's all shown, it's just, yeah, it's great. I mean, when you bought this, when you left the game store with this box, I'm sure you felt like you were about ready to partake in something truly magnificent. So I have laid out on the table most of the components that you get in the base game. There's some other stuff in the back here, but we're going to cover that at a different time. So let's go over to the minis here. Now, you don't get a ton of variety in the minis. There is a ton of variety in the role-play book about the kind of monsters that you can fight. And so you could always use proxies. Of course, Citadel, they always wanted you to use only the official models. You know, they said if you have the official Citadel models, you can use the stats for any of these monsters, because they wanted you to buy their minis. But you could always use proxies. You could always have these minis represent other things. Use your imagination. But these are the minis, at least a representation of each one that you get in the game. We have the 4 heroes here. Now, I've said before, I really like painting. I just don't have the time to do it because I'm really slow at it. So these are the 2 warriors I've painted. I really like the way the wizard turned out. I like his beard a lot. The barbarian's okay. I kind of don't like his face. I don't know. It's all right. It's okay for table quality. So we have those 2, and then the other 2 I have not painted yet. We have the the elf, and the dwarf. I love these old Citadel dwarfs. They look like little stout little barrels with giant axes. Very comical. That's one thing that the old Citadel miniatures, they had a personality to them that was, it wasn't so much dark and scary. They were, even though they were kind of creepy, they had a really good personality to them. And so then we have our green skins here, the orcs, melee and ranged. And of course, our little snotling. Yeah, I mean, look at his face. That's really funny. You know, it doesn't have to be all mean and scary looking. And then the last of the green skins here, we had our goblins. So our goblin archer and our goblin spearman. And then the big bad in this game is the Minotaur. And I think you got 3 of these, and these guys were really tough. I do kind of wish maybe in the base game that they had a better big bad. Maybe some kind of like dragon or something, but I don't know. The Minotaur's okay. And then you have, of course, the famous Skaven model that Games Workshop used in a variety of different games. I think they're the exact same models that they used in Advanced Hero Quest. So anybody who's into old Games Workshop probably has a ton of this exact same Skaven model. And then the giant bats on little stands to make them look like they're flying. Giant spiders. And giant rats, which, as anybody knows who has played Warhammer Quest, these things can be a real pain in the ass. And then you have your doorways here. And this doorway has a portcullis attached to it to symbolize your doom, that you would be trapped in the dungeon forever. So the cool thing about the doors is, as you were exploring the dungeon and going through the various tiles, you could clip these on and make your dungeons. So that's how you would do that. You would put those down on the board, and then your guys could stand there and you could get cool little action shots of them. But it really added a neat little 3D element. Alrighty. So the tiles, you have your basic junctions, your turning, and your T junction here. One thing about the tiles of this game is the pictures and video and never really does the art justice. The art has a really neat 3D quality to it. I really like it. It's subtle, but it's nice. And you have your basic corridors. And the good ones are these 6 here, the dungeon rooms. So these are where encounters would guarantee you would have an encounter each time you went into one of these different rooms. And then you have your giant objective rooms. So these are where your quest would be. And you would search the dungeon until you came across this room, and this is where your final fight would be. And there are 5 of these. I really like this one, the pit. Really neat. You can really, I don't know, it's evocative. That 3D, the shadow, you can tell it's dropping down into this dangerous pit there. Very cool. And so what you would do is, at the beginning of the game, is you would take your dungeon cards here. And each one of these represents one of the tiles. And you would pull out your 5 objective room tiles. And then you would randomly pick one. And that would signify where your quest is going to take place. So then you would open up the adventure book and you would roll a 6-sided die. And each of these objective rooms would have 6 different quests associated with it. So in the base game, there were 30 different quests that you could go on. Not bad. And it was actually really easy to make your own, which is what a lot of people did. The really neat thing about Warhammer Quest and also Advanced Hero Quest was just how easy the games are to modify and to make them your own. And so I think that's why a lot of people like them, and why a lot of people still like them to this day, is just how open-ended they are. So I'm not going to show you all the cards because I have a lot of the other event cards and treasure cards all mixed up with the expansions, and so we'll go over those at a later time. But we do have some cardboard chits here to take a look at. So you would have your, these are just some examples. You'd have your pits that you could overlay. Another portcullis card. A pit trap with spikes. A net. And then your power tokens and your luck tokens that you could spend on spells and re-rolls. And then we have our character sheets. So each one of the basic heroes that comes in the game, which is, like I said before, a dwarf, an elf, a barbarian, and a wizard, has this cardboard sheet along with a advanced profiles. So you could level up your characters up to level 10. And that was pretty hard. I mean, getting past level 1 is hard enough. This game is pretty deadly. I've played multiple games where, you know, I've had characters die on the first turn, on the first movement, fall down a pit. Oh, I forgot to bring a rope. Yeah, you're doomed. So the basic stats of the characters here, we have, let's see here. So you have your wounds. And when you start a new character, you would roll your d6 and add the value to your wounds. And then you have your movement, how many squares you can move per turn. Your weapon skill was how good you were with melee weapons. Your ballistic skill was how good you were with ranged weapons. Your strength was what you added to your damage roll to figure out how much damage you did to the monster. Your toughness was how much how tough you were, how resilient you were to taking damage. And if you had a number in a parentheses, that means you had armor. And then your initiative, that was the order that you took your turn, and how many attacks. So there's not a ton of stats in the game, but there's just enough to make things interesting. And then each of these characters had a list of gear that they started with and some special rules. So each character came with one piece of special gear that had a little card associated with it. The dwarf came with a rope, and the rope was good for getting out of pits. Never, ever, ever go into a dungeon without a rope. The Hand of Death Scroll. This is the wizard, is a one-off spell that he could use that would cause 3d6 wounds with no modifier for armor. So you would always want to save that for your last battle. Then the barbarian, or the leader of the party, would always start with the lantern. The lantern didn't really do anything except allow the heroes to stay alive in the dungeon. It was more of a thematic item, because without it, the heroes would get lost and they would die. And then the elf would start with a healing potion, and that would always come in handy as well. And then each of the heroes also came with a little token. So you could, if you had to figure out a random hero, instead of boringly rolling a dice, you could mix these up and draw one at random with a cool little picture on it. Yes, kind of pointless, but hey, also kind of cool, right? So yeah, so each character would give you, they would start with a weapon, and then you could start with armor. Pinning was how easy it was for them to break free of enemies. And then it's like a special rule, for example, so the dwarf, with a great axe, the dwarf rolls an extra dice for wounds and chooses the highest score. He adds his strength as normal. If he rolls a double, he adds the dice together and then adds his strength to the total score. If he rolls a 1, his attack goes horribly wrong and he trips over his beard. He must spend the rest of the turn getting up, and while he's doing so, any monsters attacking him add 2 to their rolls. So yeah, as you know, or maybe as you don't know, but in a Games Workshop game, you never want to roll a 1. Roll a 1 could spell instant death. Okay, and then the spell cards here. The wizard would start with 3 spells, and the spells were broken down into 3 different categories. You had defense, healing, and attack. And we would probably always kind of cheat and give at least 1 good healing and 1 good attack spell. So you'd always kind of want to take the fireball or the lightning bolt and either healing hands or heal wounds, because without a combination of those two, you can get really screwed in the game. But there's also a whole bunch of other spells, and we'll go over that in a bit, probably in the next video. So I think we'll end up this video by just taking a quick look through the rule book here. So the rule book has the same cover as the box and some fluff text on either side. I can get to the last page there. Yeah, just about the warriors. Then on the back cover here on the inside, you had your monster reference table, which had all your stats for all the base monsters, and then your to hit chart, so you could have a matrix here of what you needed to roll. So if you were rolling against a weapon skill of 4 to 4, you would have to roll a 4 or higher to hit, something like that. So pretty easy. The rules in this game are actually relatively simple, especially by today's standards where things are much more complex. And again, I think that's kind of why this game is so good, is because the rules are so simple, it's so easy to modify and to make your own. So the game was actually mostly created by Andy Jones. And then there was also a guy, I think, named Gavin Thorpe, who came on and did some of the work on the expansions and some of the White Dwarf articles. But this was back when Games Workshop was giving credit to individual designers. Now they, after a while, they stopped doing that. They just kind of went to just making everything a Games Workshop game. They definitely had more of a DIY feel back then, even though they were a big company. And you'll notice that when we go through the White Dwarf issues later on. So first of all, I love the covers of these books. They feel substantial. It's not a big book, it's only 30 pages, but it has a real heft to it. And part of that is because the cover is nice and thick, and the pages aren't that like thin, like magazine glossy paper. I wish board game manuals would stop being square, make it like a comic book shape, a rectangle shape, and just kind of maybe go back to using just regular nice paper. I don't like that thick glossy paper because it reflects light, and I don't need color in my rule books. I really like these old Games Workshop rule books. They also did a fantastic job of getting the player completely excited about playing the game. Sometimes I don't even play this game. I just read the rule book over and over again, like I'm some little kid with a Christmas catalog. And every time I do it, I just like, it makes me so happy, and I want to get the game to the table and play it and have fun with a good adventure. So you had a nice little fluffy introduction about the world, then a component overview, a little talk about the warriors and their stats and what they mean. A nice little fluff text here. Breakdown of the character sheets and what everything means, their starting equipment, how to start the game, how to pick your wounds, how to set up your dungeon. Now the power phase. The power phase was when the wizard determined how much magic power he would have that dictated how many spells he could cast. So he would roll a d6 at the start of every turn. The wizard rolls a d6. Whatever number he rolls, that's how much power points he has, and that's how many spells he can cast. So this lightning bolt spell would cost 4 power points. However, anytime the wizard rolled a 1, you would have an unexpected event. And the unexpected events you would draw from an event deck or roll on an event table, and usually very bad, terrible things happen to the party. And so they always called this the roll a 1 phase, because during playtest, the wizard players seemed to roll so many 1s that the phase quickly became known as the roll a 1 phase rather than the power phase. So that's kind of a long-going inside joke with people who have played Warhammer Quest. Never roll a 1 in a Games Workshop game. If you do, you're a sucker. So yeah, so that's the rule book. Again, another little story here. They were just so good about incorporating theme and story into everything they did. Really, really like that. So I think that's going to take that'll be the end of this first video. It's already a little long. So next time we'll take a look at a brief look at the adventure book, but then a very in-depth look at what is probably my favorite gaming rule book of all time. And that is the Warhammer Quest roleplay book. This is what makes Warhammer Quest the undisputed champion of dungeon dives. This thing adds so much to the game, all these advanced rules and all kinds of stuff. And yeah, so we'll take a look at those next time. So I hope you liked this video. I hope it was informative and somewhat entertaining. In future videos, we'll go through the warrior expansions, the boxed expansions. We'll go through, like I said, the White Dwarf issues, the Death Blow issues, a whole bunch of DIY stuff. And I think by the time we're done, we'll have a really nice collection of information about Warhammer Quest. So, all right. Well, hope you guys have a nice evening, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.